Hi everyone, it's Chef Rose here, and it's week 2 of yeast breads. Today we're going to make rosemary focaccia, and hopefully if you've had some focaccia, either you bought it at the store, or maybe you went to an Italian restaurant and they serve the focaccia with the meal. So focaccia is definitely very popular in Italy. It's considered a flatbread, and so it's going to be a little different makeup than the Italian bread that we did last week. But one of the things that I've done for years to incorporate more flavor into focaccia is add rosemary. And so we're using the recipe on page 137, and they call it olive focaccia. I'm going to take away the olives. I'm going to show you how to add rosemary. And basically, I infused the rosemary, fresh rosemary, into the water that we're going to use, and as well as even putting some rosemary into the dough. And this is just going to permeate throughout the dough and just have a great flavor to it. I will show you, while the dough is mixing, I will show you how to work with rosemary, how you can buy it in the store, and we'll talk about that as the dough is mixing. So first step in the bread is scaling the ingredients. So I have everything in grams. So 750 grams of bread flour, 470 grams of my rosemary water. And you can see there's some rosemary still in there. That's perfect. 5 grams of instant yeast, 15 grams of salt. And for this salt, I decided to buy some sea salt, coarse sea salt. And I like a coarse sea salt in a bread like this. You'll be able to taste the salt because it's bigger crystals as you eat the bread. And we're going to put that salt on top of the bread as well. And then 25 grams of olive oil. I'm using a extra light taste, but you can certainly use any olive oil that you would like. Of course, there's extra virgin, all different kinds of flavors of olive oil. So whichever is your favorite, you can use. All right, so let's step 2. We've got the ingredients scaled. So step 2 is mixing. So this will be straight dough method again. Liquids always should go in first, dry, and then the salt last. Remember, salt and yeast don't like to touch each other, so I need them both there, but you want to kind of keep them separate in the beginning because salt will slow down the yeast feeding on the starches. All right, so all the water, make sure you get all that lovely rosemary as well. I actually saved a little bit of hydrated rosemary for the top of the bread. So I'm going to scrape in all this lovely rosemary. It's really the herb most commonly used in focaccia. I'm going to add the yeast. Going to add the oil. I used to have to make this focaccia every weekend at Blue Plate Catering when I worked there because they just loved it. So be careful what you wish for. When you make something really good like that, then you have to make it all the time. So add all your flour. And then salt on the top. So we're using the mixer today because I want this dough to be a little wetter, and they call it slack, S-L-A-C-K. Meaning that it's going to have a little bit more moisture in it. So it's going to get a different internal crumb to the focaccia than the Italian bread. And I'm using the paddle. That's fine. You don't need a dough hook. Paddle works just fine. Just on low speed. Oh, a little bit of flour trying to get out there. All right. So of course now the mixing. I want to mix until I get a good gluten development. All right, good. Let me show you what it looks like. It's all come together. Great. Beautiful. Look at that. And it's a little sticky. That's fine. My mixer, I think, doesn't like the weight of this, you can tell. But I'm going to keep going. These KitchenAid mixers are great, but you got to be careful. You don't want to put this too high of a speed with a heavy dough like a bread dough. The guy who fixes our KitchenAids say that it's the main reason why some of the motors get burnt out. And you can see how it's wrapped around the paddle, and that's fine. Now I could try and knead this by hand, but it's going to be sticky, and I want it to be a little sticky. It's going to give me a nice internal crumb with a little bit of holes in it. So very difficult to do by hand. That's why I'm using the mixer to do the kneading. But we'll still check for gluten development. I'm kind of holding the top down here. But that's perfect. It's cleaned up the bowl. There's nothing left. Beautiful. Perfect. And when I felt the dough, it feels moist. That's what I want. So this will take about 5 to 6 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and lock that in place. Should be okay. So let me show you with the rosemary. When you buy it at the store, you can go find these little packages of fresh herbs, and that's what I bought. It's less than an ounce. It's a 0.75 ounce of fresh rosemary, and I'm pretty much using almost the whole package. And rosemary is very unique, very fragrant, and it grows like this. And so the best way to get it off is you pull in the opposite direction of the way the leaves are growing. So I pull down to pull them off. And you have to chop these leaves. That's where the flavor is. It's inside of it. So you would get some flavor if you just put these in like this, but they're kind of big. You get some flavor in the water, but you'll get more of it by chopping them. Certainly you can use dry. I used about 2 tablespoons fresh. That would mean you'd use about maybe 1 tablespoon of dry if that's what you have. But the fresh, I prefer it. Even at the caterer, I used fresh. And, you know, I would do this water, the rosemary water, days ahead of when I needed it, which was fine. And then I could warm it up to the temperature I wanted, which was like 100 degrees for the water. Remember from last week? So you can see I'm just giving it a rough chop. Again, this is going to release the essential oils and flavor. And that's what I want. Nice little pieces. And then you want to put it into your hot water. So I measured out the water, brought it to a boil, and then you put it in the hot water, and you saw how it changed green. So let me get you some water just to see. And it's always got to be hot. So this is an infusion, right? And the process of creating the infusion is called steeping. S-T-E-E-P-I-N-G. You steep the ingredient in a warm water. So the most common thing that we consume that is steeped is tea, right? You put tea into hot water, coffee. So it's basically putting an infusion. You're taking a solid ingredient such as herbs. It could be a cinnamon stick, vanilla bean. You put it into a warm liquid and let it sit together and create that infusion of flavor. Okay. But yeah, a lot of people drink infused liquids every day between tea and coffee. And then here's that extra soaked rosemary that I'm going to use on top of the dough for garnish later. All right, so let's check to see where our gluten development is. Remember, you want to see what kind of elasticity. So I want to show you, if you can see inside the bowl, that some of the dough is stuck to the bottom. That's what I want. I want that to kind of have a little stickiness like that. That's perfect. So I'm looking for elasticity. You know, I want to see how much it can stretch before it breaks. It's getting there. It's getting there. Needs a little bit more. So you can see how sticky. It definitely sticks to my hands, but that's okay. That's what I want. So step 3 will be fermentation. Let me move that. Step 3 is called bulk fermentation, right? You've got all the dough. It's called bulk. And that's where the yeast will feed on the starches, sugar in the dough to create CO2 and alcohol. So fermentation, I know a lot of you didn't get it right, but the question I said, when does fermentation end? Well, fermentation continues throughout the whole process, through all those steps that we do, until it goes into the oven and bakes and reaches 140 degrees, then the yeast is killed. So that's why it's really important that your water that you use is, you take a temperature, because you don't want it too hot. And people, you know, they just take hot water from the tap, and if it gets close to 120, 130, you know, it might kind of slow down the yeast a lot. So you want to be very careful in terms of that. So fermentation is continuing throughout pretty much the whole process until it bakes and reaches 140. Okay. So video 2 will take you through step 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way through proofing. I'm going to top one of the loaves of focaccia with caramelized onions. So in video 2, I'm going to show you how to caramelize some onions for the top. The other loaf, I'm just going to put simply some of the rosemary on there, as well as some Parmesan cheese. And that's really my favorite. It's just really plain bread. But a lot of people love the caramelized onions too. It adds a great flavor to that. In the store, most focaccias usually will have tomatoes on them, but you know, usually if you're eating a meal with pasta, you have a lot of tomatoes going on anyway, so I think the bread should be plain to complement that. But lots of different ways to work with the focaccia. Now back to the rosemary while we're waiting. You can see already that it's getting colored. It goes really fast. And it took about 30 minutes from boiling water to about the 100 degrees. And so you saw how nice and green, how much good flavor I got from that infusion. All right, let's check. And again, the dough is sticking at the bottom, and that's perfect. You can actually see the stretchiness too. Oh, beautiful. Gosh, though, I used to have to make anywhere from 20 to 40 pounds of focaccia at the caterer every weekend. So I haven't made focaccia for years because I just got so tired of making it. Remember the window pane test, right? So you're basically tugging on it, pull it, tug it, turn it, tug. So I'm looking for that elasticity. And see, it's kind of breaking a little quickly, so it needs just a little bit more mixing. I hope everyone's doing well. I hope some of you made the homemade pizza from last week. You know, I've never done it, but you probably could use this focaccia as a pizza crust as well too. Actually, that'd be really excellent with the herbs in it. Again, rosemary is the common herb used in focaccia. I've never really, the only other herb that I've infused would be mint into a product. But certainly when you put a bay leaf in your sauce or stock, you're creating an infusion from the bay leaf. I'm sure that in our class we've done the vanilla bean in milk to infuse flavor. Or when we made a custard, use the vanilla bean. Cinnamon sticks are great to put into like a rice pudding. Again, steep it into the milk for making ice cream, for creme anglaise. You could do other common infusions would be whole cloves, star anise. Again, any solid ingredient. You could use real coffee beans and chop them up, put them into milk, and infuse the coffee into that. So lots of ways to create infusions. Remember, the process of leaving them together is called steeping. You're steeping the rosemary in the hot water to create an infusion of flavor. All right, let's take a look. All right. Beautiful, beautiful. You can even see the stretchiness here. Beautiful. Good. I think it looks good. Now, here's a little tip. I'm going to go ahead and ferment the dough in the same mixing bowl. Why dirty another bowl? But I need to grease the bowl to make sure the dough doesn't stick and doesn't rise. So, little trick I learned was to just put in a little bit of olive oil down the side, and that should coat all the dough. Beautiful. And that's what I want. Yep. Perfect. It coats the side of the bowl. So, get all this off. Again, stickiness is good. Ah, my goodness. Come on. There we go. All right. Get it all off. So it's sticky, but yet, see, stays pretty much together. All right. So I'm going to just turn the dough a little bit so it all gets covered with a little oil from the side. Why don't we check? Remember, we want our dough to ideally be between 78 and 80 degrees. So let's take a look. Look at that. 80 degrees. Perfect. Yay. 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 All right, I'm going to cover it, put it in a warm place. Not too hot, just a warm place, and let it rise for at least 45 minutes to an hour till it looks about doubled in size. So I'll see you then for part 2. Bye.